Hello, security pros. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on today's ESA webinar. Today's webinar is titled, I'm so sorry, Revolutionizing Fire Safety Multi-Carrier Cellular Technology in Action. Join us for an exciting session on Telguard's latest innovation, the TG-7FM Multi-carrier Commercial Fire product. Discover how the TG-7FM leverages direct connections to AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, ensuring unmatched reliability and connectivity. We'll explore the unit's groundbreaking features, provide effective installation techniques to reduce future truck rolls, and highlight Telguard's industry-leading three-tiered approach. Learn why the TG-7FM sets a new standard in fire alarm communication, delivering seamless and dependable performance. I'm Ana Magallon, a Marcom specialist at ESA, and I'm excited to lead this webinar today. Before we dive in, I'd like to provide some tips for those of you joining us on your first ESA webinar. Welcome! You will be muted for the duration of this session, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment comes to mind at any point during today's session, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ensure we save some time for your questions with our experts today. We will also be recording this webinar so you can rewatch the on-demand session and share it with your colleagues. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email thanking you for your attendance with a link to the recording. Additionally, don't miss out on the opportunity to join us at ESX 2025. It will take place on June 16th and 19th in Cobb County, Georgia, home of the Atlanta Braves, and it is the premier event for electronic security and life safety professionals, with engaging sessions, valuable networking opportunities, and cutting-edge technology exhibits. ESX promises to be an unforgettable experience. Mark your calendars, registration will be opening soon. We at ESA realize your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us today. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our presenters, Daniel Rosales, Senior Director of Marketing, Product Management, and Technical Services, and David Cruz, Regional Sales Manager. Take it away, guys.
All right. Thank you, Ana, for that intro. And I'd also like to thank everybody else for taking some time today and joining us here. Today, we'll be concentrating on our new fire communicator, which will kind of emphasize the topic of the new standard for cellular and also harnessing the power of multi-carrier cellular technology in commercial fire applications. But before we begin here, let's kind of go over the outline of different topics we'll be covering. So first is, who is Telguard, right? So we'll kind of go over that. We'll see what the main issues we're seeing with POTS in our industry these days, how our product meets code, and alternative solutions to POTS, which can include wireless mesh networks, internet devices, and cellular, and in the different variances of cellular within that technology. We'll also cover Telguard, the Telguard system, how it works, and then finally we'll kind of go over our multi-carrier technology from Telguard. So before we begin, I believe we have a quick video to get us started here.
With Telguard, you get a UL-listed universal alarm communicator that's quick and easy to install and activate. One that's compatible with more alarm formats than any other brand. One that uses its own Tier 3 data center to receive and transmit signals in milliseconds across the US and Canada. And one that's backed by tech support that responds within 30 seconds in the language you prefer. Telguard, the alarm communication experts.
Awesome. Well, we'll jump into some history with Telguard and spotlight some milestones. So Telguard was established in 1986. That's actually the same year I was born. So I'll let you guys do the math on that. But in 1999, Telguard released its first analog communicator. Then in 2005, we jumped into the cellular world and released our 2G communicators. In 2010, the TG-7FS, our flagship fire communicator, was the first universal soul path in the industry. Then in 2012, we jumped into the 3G technology. 2016, we released 4G LTE communicators. Then 2021, we are using now the 5G LTE-M, which Daniel will kind of get into what that technology is. And then today, 2024, we're looking at the TG-7FM, which is our first multi-carrier communicator in the industry. So not 2 carriers, but 3. And I would also like to take some time to kind of briefly highlight some of our other products as well. So starting with our residential intrusion products, we have the TG1 Express unit and the TG4. Both units can be used as a sole path communication, but the TG4 can also be used as a dual path to POTS. They both power from panel, or actually they both power from panel, but the TG4 has an option to power from a AC transformer as well. And moving on to the TG7s, we have the TG7 unit, which is looks identical to the TG7E. The only differences here is the TG7 does dual path with cellular and POTS, whereas the TG7E does Ethernet and cell. But as far as the features and everything it does, it practically works the same. The TG7A is going to be our heavy duty. We just got that secure armor chassis on it. This is more for banks and jewelry store, but as far as the features, it does exactly the same thing. So again, these are our commercial intrusion products. And then we move on to our commercial fire products with our flagship TG-7FS. We have the TG-7FP, which is cellular only. And I call it the little brother to the TG-7FS unit, and the TG-7FE, whereas the TG-7FS is dual path with cell and POTS. TG-7FE is Ethernet and cell. All units power from panel. The TG-7FS and TG-7FE have that AC power compatibility as well. We also have upgrade boards, which will be the TG-7UB. So if you only need to upgrade the board on a Telguard product, you could just purchase the board by itself. And then we also have a TG-PEM. This is great for a DAC-less panel. This offers up to 8 zones to your panel if you need to wire those zones straight to the Telguard unit. And then it also has the ability to convert your Telguard product to power from the panel as well. But that's pretty much a brief kind of overview on our products here. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Daniel Rosales.
Thanks, David. So before we get started on the multi-carrier product itself, the features and the technology behind it, we want to take a little bit of time and really talk about the problems that we've been seeing for the past couple of years related to POTS, some of the solutions that have been pushed out by our peers, by what I would consider non-peers, but still new entrants into the market, just to kind of lay out all the different options, the pros and cons, and let you, as a potential user of our product, kind of make a decision as to what solution works best for you. So getting started with POTS, we all know what POTS is, plain old telephone service. It's been around for many, many years. And actually the technology that is used today, it's not much different than what was conceptualized back in the 1880s. Twisted pair, tip and ring, it's the concept is the same, right? I would like to say that there's a big, huge difference as far as what is used. And there really is, but there isn't, right? What we've known, we've come to appreciate as POTS is no longer today what it was 20 or 30 years ago. The systems that we have come to appreciate and to know that they are reliable as can be, the copper wire systems are basically slowly fading and being transitioned into newer technology that is either A, more cost effective, or B, just simply easier to come by. Now, before we get into how that technology is working, evolving, and how it's being replaced, I want to talk a little bit about a least cost routing concept. And if you're familiar with least cost routing, it's basically just trying to figure out the best way to get from point A to point B, right? Think of it a phone call. having to go through having different options, different nodes, different switches. Think of a giant mesh network, a giant network where a carrier can choose the different paths to get from point A to point B. When you call your mom, you may be down in Florida, your mom may be up in New York, and you make a phone call. That carrier, there isn't a single wire that connects you from your landline in your house in Florida to her landline, her house or apartment in New York. It just doesn't happen. So you have to go through several different switches, nodes, different points where decisions need to be made as far as who takes up the next layer or the next segment of that call. So the concept of least cost routing is basically says, hey, I'm going to make that phone call. I'm going to go ahead and connect you from Florida to New York. But along the way, I'm going to choose the path that costs the least so that I can charge you the least amount of money. Or as a business, right, I can have the least amount of cost and I can charge you the most so I can make a little bit of profit. And it's just the way the business works. And that's the way that phone lines have been operating for a long time. Least cost routing is the way that you can actually reduce the cost by figuring out the path that gets you to the same result, that gets you to the same you and your mom talking by doing the least expensive path. The problem now that we have is that we have transitions happening, right? So we're well aware that POTS has a problem. We're well aware of regulatory changes that have happened over the years that are allowing different things to happen that weren't allowed 3 or 4 years ago. And there's two types of transition. The front end transition, it's the one that's very, very easy to assimilate, right? It's basically you having a house phone or you owning a property and deciding I'm no longer going to pay hundreds of dollars for a phone line. I am going to either eliminate it or replace it with what is being sold to me as a digital service, a digital version, a digital line, or just voice over IP, right? So very much aware as a business owner or as a property manager or as a house owner, I'm very much aware that I'm making the change. I'm transitioning it on the front end. The tricky part of it is when the transition happens on the back end, right? When you are paying the company those hundreds of dollars to make sure that you have that antiquated phone system that has been working for you for years. Meantime, in the back end, the last mile, those switches and nodes that your phone calls have to get through, those switches are making changes to their hardware. They're making changes to the way they operate, the way they provide the service, and they're basically giving you issues that you didn't call for because you didn't make a change. That the receiver side of things, if we're talking about just a regular phone call, if your mom never changed her carrier, or if we're talking about an actual alarm system, the receiver, the party, the central station, the receiving party, the supervising party didn't make any changes, right? And all of a sudden something changes in the middle. That is a back-end transition that you didn't request it. The receiving side never requested it, but it's happening because of the POTS issues going on. So what are some of these POTS issues that we're talking about? The number one thing that we've kind of really, I would like to say the pandemic and everything that came from it kind of sped the process of evolving. A lot of the switches are no longer being manufactured. A lot of the components for these switches are no longer being manufactured. Once we had that issue where there was a shortage of different components, and it wasn't just chips, it wasn't just very specific computer chipsets or Intel. It was a lot of everything. At Telguard, we were very fortunate that we weren't as impacted as other companies may have been because of the way that we did things. But even things as plastics, we had issues with. We had to make special arrangements to be able to provide and supply our customers with the products they need. So during the pandemic and the time after, there were a lot of supply chain issues. And a lot of these supply chain issues basically forced companies to look at what their business was. And some of them started pivoting, right? If you know that POTS as an industry, as a technology is slowly, melting away, it's fading into something completely different. It's what you service, the type of service that you provided your hardware for is transitioning into something else. As a company, there's going to be a time in which you're going to have to pivot and say, hey, I'm no longer going to manufacture components for these old systems. It's kind of like if you remember a VHS system, right? If you're my age and you remember what a VCR is and a VHS tape or even a Betamax, right? Take Betamax, for example. If you manufacture components for Betamax, at some point you saw the writing on the wall and say, hey, no, I got to transition to something else. This is not going to last long. Same thing with a VCR. At some point when DVDs came out and everything else, you had to evolve. If you're still making components for a VCR today, you're probably going out of business or you're right on the line of getting out there. So it's kind of what prompted this situation where parts are now hard to come by because manufacturers are not making a lot of these components, or basically pivoting away from that old analog technology and starting to manufacture and produce hardware for the digital era, right? Copper wire, while it was a solid choice, it was never meant to be a permanent choice. As far as wiring, installations are getting old. They're prone to failures. David can probably attest to some of these. There are some rural areas, particularly in the territory that he serves, where, when it floods, communications just happen to drown, literally drown, for hours if you're using plain old telephone service. It's good for us, right? Because that's what we get the calls and say like, hey, I need to replace this with something cellular. But it just goes to show you that even though the infrastructure may be there in some of these areas, it's to the point where aging has taken its toll, and it's going to have to be replaced. It's going to have to be replaced later, sooner, depending on what the owners of the providing services actually have. So to kind of go back on what we talked about, least cost routing, right? Think of it this way: supply and demand, right? The higher the supply on something, chances are the prices are going to go down, because there isn't going to be as much demand. If you have a lot of one thing, they're probably going to put it on sale so you can go ahead and just get that inventory, right? Or the other way around. If there isn't a lot of something, they're probably going to hike up the price because they know that there are going to be more people demanding it, wanting to get it, right? So now take that concept and apply it to pots, switches, and all these different hardware components that are slowly aging away. Now you have these nodes and switches, switch operators that have to make a choice, right? The choice they have to make is, A, do I spend 3 times as much on a part to keep this analog system as true to analog as I can be, and either A, eat up that extra money, or B, start charging my customer more money to use my switch, or B, do I go with the other route, which is, let me just transition it to a digital concept. So instead of it being truly analog, which is what we know worked, they're basically putting in analog to digital and back to analog conversion systems in place, which are A, a lot cheaper, B, a lot easier to come by. The downside to that is that when we take a look at the least cost routing concept, right? Again, you have 2 ways of doing it. Option A, somebody spends the money and keeps it as a true analog switch. Somebody doesn't spend that much money and transitions it into a digital platform, into a digital, more of a digitized switch. Well, the entity to spend more money is likely going to charge you more to use their switch because it works better, right? Because they are truer to an analog concept than the other guy. But if you go back to the concept of least cost routing, anytime a phone call is made, chances are that call is going to choose the path that is more economical. And that is when we run into the problems, because basically the switch operators that are trying to do the right thing by trying to keep that analog system as intact as possible, they're not getting as much coming in for their choice. So what all of that ends up doing, couple that with the regulatory changes that are allowing these switch operators to just change and charge more to their customers, all of that is ending up in a situation in which POTS from 2024, it's very much different than the POTS system from 2022. And it's light years away from what it used to be back in the 2010s even. So with that, we look at code compliance as a way of saying, okay, well, if POTS is going away, what can I use to replace it? One of the things that's true about POTS is that it's specifically called out in the code to say that you can use that type of system and you can use redundancy and you can do this and you can do that. But for other systems that are not technically POTS, right? For example, the category that Telguard and other cellular communicators fall under, we fall under a performance category, which basically means as long as you perform in a specific way, hey, for fire, you're allowed to work and you're allowed to replace 2 phone lines. You're allowed to replace 1 phone line. In short, taking away some of the other, battery and power consumption requirements. The big requirements for us is if you're going to do a single path as a performance-based technology, you got to have the option of 60-minute supervision. If you're a dual path, you have to have the option of 6-hour supervision on each path. Now, if we take a step back and take a look at, why would somebody choose a sole path when a dual path seems to be so much better? You really want to think of it from a perspective of diversity and what type of redundancy you're actually having, right? If you think back on POTS and analog lines, and you think of, okay, I have a building, I have 2 phone lines, they're working great. I'm only going to set it up for daily tests. Each one, I'm going to space them out, one at 5 in the morning, one at 5 p.m. This is a fire system, so I got to have those redundant lines. How many of us actually take the time to trace from the demarcation point, trace those wires to see what else those 2 phone lines have in common? Chances are the switches they're hitting along the way are going to be the same ones. Chances are there is going to be a unifying point of failure at some point down the path. So how redundant really are you? What you really are doing if you're maintaining 2 phone lines is you're basically giving yourself about a 12-hour gap where something could definitely 100% go wrong and you have nothing to show for. So as an integrator, you're basically setting yourself up to have a huge gap of time in which things can go wrong. And let me tell you, something is always going to go wrong at some point for at least one of your customers over a lifetime. All right. We're just kind of hoping that the systems that we put in place can either prevent them or can mitigate them or can let us know as quickly as possible that something is wrong so we can fix it before it becomes a thing. So when it comes to redundant services, you're relying on a single technology, because they're both 2 phone lines, right? That will likely have a single point of weakness, point of failure. And you're basically saying every 12 hours, send a signal through that phone line so that it can check it and make sure that it's okay. What we're saying with SoulPath, based on the requirements that were put forth for performance-based technologies like ours and like other of our peers, is basically, hey, you got to monitor that signal. And within 60 minutes, you got to let me know if there's a problem. So with Telguard or with anybody using cellular or any technology as a single sole path, we're basically letting you know within an hour that something is wrong. So that's the difference between redundancy and supervision, right? Now, I'm 100% on top of redundancy as a viable way, as long as you diversify your technology. Number one, get away from POTS, diversify your technology, meaning that if you want to do 2 technologies, you want to be redundant, cellular and internet is always the way to go. You have 2 very separate, very distinct technologies that don't touch each other one way or another, right? So it definitely gives you that. It gets rid of that single point of failure that you would have with 2 phone lines. The other sort of unheralded benefit is to control the path. And control of the path really refers to what you as an integrator can keep control of, right? With a cellular device like Telguard, it doesn't matter what your business manager, what your property manager, or the homeowner, it doesn't matter who owns the building, who makes decisions on the phone lines or on the internet access, they cannot touch your cellular. They cannot touch your cellular account. They cannot go up to AT&T and say, hey, go ahead and kill that service. I don't want it anymore. They have to physically go in and remove the device, knock off the antenna, or do something that's not permissible, right? So that is what I mean by control of the path. With something like Telguard, where you're relying on an equipment that is literally owned by you and commanded by you, programmed by you, you are the only one that has access to it. You are removing that point of failure from the system. And I'll tell you, I mean, there's been plenty of times where we've gotten customers coming over to the SoulPath side. They've been using cellular as a secondary path, and they come over to the SoulPath to just strictly cellular for their communication path, because somebody on the property management side made a decision because Charter or Comcast or whoever gave them a call about bundling a deal where they get a business line that's 100% digital, and it's going to look the same. Your phones don't have to do anything different. You can use all the equipment that you already have. before you know it, alarm panel starts beeping because they see that second dial tone not being the same, right? So we control the path. You're actually making sure that they can't do that to you. And as an integrator, like we said, every truck roll counts, any minute counts. And even if it's not our fault, man, it creates that aura of, oh, the fire system is acting out again. So anytime anything that we can do to prevent that, it's always a plus. When it comes to alternate technologies, I'm not going to dwell on these too much. I'm sure we all kind of know what they are. Wireless mesh networks, pros and cons. It's a low reliance on public infrastructure. You're basically using lower frequencies. You have multiple path validation. The downsides to them is that it takes a little bit of time and heavy investment up front to really build out your network. The total pro for it is that the cost after you have a network truly fully built out is the cost is really minimal to non-existent, right? The downside also is that you are very well set within your network. Fringe areas are just not going to have you're just not going to be able to have good coverage. And even with customers of ours that are very heavy users of wireless mesh networks, cellular option, Telguard still a viable option because you want to make sure that you don't just focus on a specific area. If you have business to be had right outside your circle, it's better to say, yes, I have an option for you than to say, no, you have to wait until I build out my network, or you have to pay to be able to build out your network to be able to get to them. So wireless mesh networks, pros and cons, 100% is a viable option. It's been used for many years. Other options that we're seeing out there are internet options, internet devices. One of the things that I want to make sure that we understand from internet devices is the distinction between WAN and LAN, right? Wide area network is your internet access, is what happens outside of the building after you get out to the internet. That's the wide area network. Is the internet outside of your router, outside of your cable modem if you're at a house, right? Your local area network is what happens after the internet gets dropped into your building, after the access gets given to your router. And the big deal there is that LAN could create issues of ownership. So the pros readily available. Most businesses in the commercial space, most businesses already have them. It's a fast, ready connection, usually just ready to go. The cons are usually that they're not going to set up an internet connection specifically for your fire system or for your Berg system, right? It's going to be a shared connection where you're going to have to share it with the business, with the day-to-day. The big downside is that it's locally managed and that it's dependent on equipment, right? So locally managed means that you have a network guy, a network person that basically manages what MAC addresses, what devices are allowed, what ports are supposed to be there and opened, what firewalls are supposed to be restricting of what devices, which could create an issue as far as how an internet device will be able to communicate and how, I would say, how willing your customers are to take in an internet device. And I'll tell you from personal experience with some of with our TG-7FE devices or internet devices, basically anytime there's a big scare about some system being hacked and some information being thrown out there from a bank or from whatever, we see those audits coming in and we see those questions coming in like, hey, what ports do we need to open up? And we have to talk sometimes with network people and kind of let them know, hey, the way that Telguard does things, we don't ever just have internet as an option, because the way that we do things on our side is we're relying on the cellular path to be our way into the system. And if you think about it, that kind of addresses that issue, right? Because a lot of the issues that we're going to have with the way that these network managers want to do is they want to block stuff from coming in. Stuff from going out is not a big deal. That happens every day. They do the internet guest account, the Wi-Fi guest accounts. That's not a big deal. It's about stuff poking in and coming in through ports that they're not aware of, that they don't want to. So they don't want to poke holes in a firewall to have strangers come in. The way that Telguard goes about it, we're basically saying, hey, any communication inbound into that system happens over cellular. It's not under the network manager's jurisdiction at all. It doesn't touch that internet access, but anything coming out could use the internet. which again is something that they're used to, right? So we get around the locally managed issue with the TG-7FE and the TG-7E products by the fact that we have an active cellular communication at all times. But the dependency on equipment, that's something that we can't quite get around. And it's one of the reasons why, from the Telguard's perspective, we like to promote internet access or internet usage as a good redundant pathway to cellular. Because at the end of the day, you still have a cable modem, you still have a router, you still have another piece of equipment that, again, it's you're kind of losing that control of the path because you have somebody else that can have access to it, that they're doing some kind of maintenance work. Let me go ahead and turn it off for a second. Oh, it went bad. Let me go ahead and replace it on my own timeline because you don't own that route, right? Because you don't have that firewall that's sitting behind it and whatever else may happen. So as far as an internet option, for us, it's a great second option. It's a great secondary pathway. But we don't, from the Telguard's perspective, we want to make sure that there's always a way to get in no matter what. And that's where the cellular component comes in. Some of the newer internet devices that have been flooding the market, dial tone replacement devices, and if you know about fire code and how that works, really what it comes down to is, are these devices UL listed? Are these devices NFPA compliant? One of the things that I would urge you to do is do your own research, right? On any kind of internet device that claims to be able to transmit the signals or claims to be compatible with alarm systems. Let's do the research. If it's not coming from somebody within the industry that has the experience, that has the knowledge, that claims to have that UL 64 for fire, for example, or in Canada, UL 559, we have to have a little question mark around that device and figure out why they don't have it. Most of the time, some of the research that I've done, a lot of these devices claim NFPA compliance, right? But they don't have the listing. So there's a reason. If you know what the listing is for, listing is just a testing, right? It's just a company certifying that, hey, this device meets all the requirements that NFPA code says. So when you have a supplier that's basically telling you, I am NFPA compliant, but you don't see the listing listed under their device, there's probably a reason why. And it's likely because NFPA compliance is being interpreted in a different manner. And that's where the demarcation point comes into the picture. And I don't want to dwell too much into this, but if you do want to have that conversation, I'd be more than glad to take it offline and exchange emails and have more conversations on it. What it comes down to is any device, particularly on fire, if you're looking to do a fire communication pathway that is not POTS, that it uses internet, please make sure that the device itself is ULA 64, because that tells you that it's been thoroughly tested, that it has been put through the grinder, that it meets all the requirements. And I tell you, we're currently have 2 devices under UL certification, and it is not easy. It is a pain in the neck, and it has to be. It has to be for them to be able to tell us that the device works as intended. As far as cellular goes, which is kind of a Telguard's bread and butter, like David mentioned, we've been at it for quite some time, since the late 90s. We had our analog device, which was, literally like a giant cell phone inside of a box. If you had opened it up, if you had any experience with Telguard, back in those days, we were mostly intrusion. It was literally like a giant cell phone mounted on top of a motherboard, and there were a couple of connections, and it was some great technology back in the day, but it was giant, it was big, and it was basically using analog technology. As technology evolves, Telguard was able to sort of evolve with the times, but never really on par. And I'll say that, so you can understand. From a consumer perspective, right? We're always looking for the next best thing, right? When the iPhone 14 came out, you're looking, oh, what does it have? What does it not have that the Android has? Let me wait for the iPhone 15. iPhone 15 came out. Now you're waiting for the next September, October, when you can see what the 16 has, right? And it's always a thing of what's next. I got 4K. Okay, I want 8K definition. I got 8K. Okay, now I want to be able to shoot in 8K in 3D so that I can see everything. Like, you're always asking for more. The business for wireless networks is really about selling data. It's not so much about selling hardware and selling phones. It's really about selling data. So the way that consumer technology evolves, right? The more you want, the more data you're going to have to consume, the more
Uh-oh, it seems we lost Daniel
the
there.
situation in which we continue
Oh,
to
there we go.
evolve at a rapid pace, right? And from a consumer perspective, that works because how often do we wait more than 2 years to get a cell phone? It doesn't really happen. AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, some of the smaller guys as well, they're all basically telling you, hey, sign a contract, I'll give you a free phone. 2-year contract, I'll give you the brand new latest iPhone or the latest Samsung foldable phone. Now you're not even tied to contracts anymore. You can just pay by the month for that phone. You can rent it out if you want, right? So there's always an opportunity as a consumer to get to the next level, to get the next technology going, right? So traditional consumer cellular is always really nowadays built with smartphones in mind. We want high bandwidth demand. We want to make sure that you get as much data as possible because me as a wireless provider, let's just say I'm AT&T, I'm Verizon, I'm T-Mobile, I want you to consume as much data as possible. In comes the Internet of Things, right? So we see what the consumer world does. We see the possibilities. And we also see how the other side of the fence, I guess you could say the non-smart devices, right, can actually become smarter through the Internet of Things. And you can kind of read on the slide, what the actual definition of IoT is. The way that I usually try to phrase it is think of a light bulb, right? Think of a light bulb that your grandparents used to go to the hardware store and get. What are the options that they used to have? I don't know, 100 watts, 60 watts, the incandescent, maybe the fluorescent ones. That was about it. You go to Home Depot, you go to Ace, you go to Lowe's now, and you got those Samsung LEDs that change colors, connect to the Wi-Fi. You can make it do whatever you want. Turn off on a schedule. You can make them flash at you whenever there's a motion. There's a lot of things that you can do with a light bulb. At the end of the day, it's still a light bulb, right? It just has to evolve to the point where now that the light bulb can use the internet, can use a connection to something else to be better, to give you better performance, to give you more features. And that's basically what the Internet of Things is all about. It's basically saying, hey, we can connect devices that before weren't really thought of as having any kind of connectivity, connect them to the internet, connect them to an interface, and let's make them do something else. Well, that concept is great. But how do you do that with devices that are not attached to a network? Think of a car, for example. A car is now always going to be parked in your driveway. But nowadays, a lot of us have access. I have a Ford pickup truck, right? I can go ahead and start the car remotely. So how does that work? That works because the car itself has a cellular chip. Now, when you think about what that car needs, what that truck needs, that truck doesn't need to stream 4K videos. That truck doesn't need to be able to download massive amounts of data every day. What that truck really needs is very basic stuff. Number one, it cannot drain your battery, right? In your car, you don't want it to drain your battery just by simply being on. So it needs to be like super low consumption. Number two, you don't really have the ability to extend the antenna and have another like a mag mount antenna to be able to reach your car. So you want it to have a good penetration. You want it to have good coverage everywhere you go. And at the end of the day, the type of data that you're going to be consuming from a car, being able to start it or just get statistics from it, it's very minimal. It's very minimal pieces of data. And that's where LTE-M comes into the picture. LTE-M, the M stands for machine to machine. And it's basically saying the companies, the carriers, recognizing a need for devices that are not smartphones, that are not consumer level phones, that have different requirements. Their requirements are basic: low power consumption, good coverage, reliability, and also very, very important, scalability, so that we don't have to change them every couple of years. And that was the beauty of LTE-M for us. And that was actually one of the reasons why we decided to go with LTE-M early on. It's basically us saying CAT-M, LTE-M is a piece of technology that will give us what we as an industry require. We need good coverage. We need low power consumption for those systems that are going to be powering off the panels. And most importantly, we needed to be able to reliably work for years and years. One of the caveats of being an LTE-M device is that it needs to be able to transition from 4G to 5G when the time comes. So that was one of the number one things that we saw. And once we read that particular piece of technology requirement, that is the way to go, right? One of the biggest headaches that we have for anybody, any of our integrators here using Telguard or any cellular device, one of the biggest headaches really is when the sunset comes around, right? We just went through a couple, AT&T and Verizon. Sunset time comes around and you have to hit up your customers and say, hey, I got to get to your building, I got to get to your office, I got to get to your house, and I got to change that before a specific date. And then you have to deal with a headache of where's the money coming from, who's funding it, and all of that. Well, with LTE-M, with the technology that we're using now, the technology itself will be able to work when 4G LTE gets sunset and 5G becomes the main technology for the major networks. We should be able to transition into using that 5G technology. For now, today, because coverage is greater, coverage is best with LTE, that is more or less the footprint that our radios are using. But when the time comes to switch, it should be able to do it with no problem. So that is the beauty of Cat-M technology. Now, I will be remiss if I don't mention all the other technologies that are out there as well. AT&T FirstNet, for example, is not something that Telguard currently has as a part of its portfolio. We are actually allowed, we have applied for it, and we do have the rights to be able to provide FirstNet service. It's just currently not part of our portfolio. And it really is a technology that was developed with government funding, if you will, by AT&T. And it's basically what it comes down to is it's given a specific band, a frequency to first responders. And what that means is that whenever something happens, a disaster happens, and all the lines are clogged and the bandwidth is taken up by all the consumers trying to call their loved ones or try to get on the internet to find out what's going on from their mobile handheld devices, first responders are going to have a specific band that will not be accessible to the regular consumer. So it's a great technology. It's a very robust system. It's still getting built out. It's still getting a little bit more enhancements from AT&T side. So it's continuously growing. It is a technology that we're keeping an eye on. One of the downsides, not downside, but one of the misconceptions that happen to be on FirstNet is that it's 100% completely independent, right? It still depends on hardware. So, my family is from Florida, and we've been hearing news of hurricanes and tropical storms, and currently awaiting the next hurricane coming down to the west side of Florida. When a tower goes down, a tower goes down. So whether you have FirstNet or you don't have FirstNet, if a tower that gets used by AT&T goes down, you just don't have coverage, right? So while it's a great technology, it isn't like it's a satellite backing it up or anything along those lines. There still has its flaws that are inherent with any other technology. Something else you probably never really heard of is Verizon Frontline, which is sort of Verizon's answer to AT&T. As far as the FirstNet concept is concerned, the difference here is that it isn't really anything separate. It's not a different band that gets allocated to first responders. It's just a prioritization scheme that Verizon basically gives. If you're a frontline consumer, if you're an agency that has Frontline, your calls, your data services will be prioritized, but it won't be allocated to a different band. Now, as far as the Telguard system, I'm not going to go too deep into it. I think by now, hopefully, you kind of all know what we do. We basically bring systems that are not meant to have cellular technology, and we bring them into the fold by using our communication center to deliver those alarm signals. And through other partnerships as well, we're being able to deliver things to cloud services and other things, everything using cellular or internet-based systems. One of the new things that we have is that we've added T-Mobile as a network, as a partner of ours in our offerings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Telguard system is very straightforward. We have a dialer capture system on the front, which is on the Telguard device that connects to your panel, transmits over cellular, and on the back end, our TCC delivers a signal to the central station over IP, over phone line, or lately we've been doing a lot of XML posting, so we can actually bypass the receivers and just go directly into Mastermind directly into stages, and we're working on other things to be a little bit more friendlier to other platforms that central stations use. Now, the core of today, I guess, kind of put you through like 40 minutes of talking to get to the multi-carrier technology. But multi-carrier technology, it's basically what Telguard is promoting with this latest product, the TG-7FM. And what it really is just our ability to not have you as an integrator worry about what carrier to choose. You no longer have to worry about, do I have to get an AT&T unit? Do I have to get a Verizon unit? Would any of them actually work? The truth of the matter is that with AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, right, we're basically capturing the three major networks in the US. AT&T and T-Mobile have roaming agreements with local carriers as well. Verizon, not as much. They do things a little bit differently because they do have, ample coverage through acquisition. But at the end of the day, basically what this means is that if you have access to all three networks with a multi-carrier technology, you don't have to worry about what carrier to use. You don't have to ask your customers, hey, does AT&T work in your area? Is Verizon best? Hey, what kind of service do you have on your phone? That conversation shouldn't happen anymore because with this product, it's going to go ahead and go through each one of these carriers and figure out what the best carrier is, what the second best carrier is, and figure out the order for it to work. And that is part of what we call the CSP or the carrier selection process. So the carrier selection process, patent pending, it's an innovation basically by which we're not really just saying, hey, what does it look like here? What does it look like there? Let's just read the signal strength of everybody and call it a day. We're actually turning the device on and analyzing the performance under each carrier. So the unit will actually get on AT&T, get on T-Mobile, get on Verizon. When it powers up, it'll analyze, the performance, packets drop, things of that nature. And it'll actually decide, okay, so this is the one for me. But keep in mind, these are the other two, the way the other two are performing. So that when the time comes, I can actually use that information to fail over. So it's an innovative approach. We have direct connections to each carrier. And I like to throw this in because we're basically, the concept of having multiple carriers is something that could have been done a long time ago, right? Through a virtual network operator. But it's not the ideal way of doing it. Going through a virtual operator basically means that there's a virtual operator that's going to make a decision for us as far as the carriers to go to. We have direct connections to each carrier. If something goes wrong with AT&T today, right, with our current single carrier units, we reach out directly to AT&T and we say, hey, what's going on? Same thing with Verizon. We have that direct relationship, that direct connection. That's what we deal with. We get on, a cycle of calls until the issue is resolved. With a multi-carrier product, right? Single radio, single SIM, all the profiles, all the carriers in there. What it basically means is that if AT&T does go down, and I keep using AT&T, let me go somebody else. If Verizon goes down, right? It'll say, okay, Verizon's down. Let me go ahead and switch over to T-Mobile, right? And what we'll see on our side is, hey, we'll see a lot of units dropping from Verizon, switching over to another network. Let's get on the phone with Verizon. We have that direct relationship, figure out what's going on and fix that issue. But in the meantime, you don't have to worry about it because T-Mobile's got you covered. And if something happens to T-Mobile, which chances are, knock on wood, doesn't happen, then you still got AT&T as a third option, right? Now, first, second, and third, that is not designated by me. It's not designated by Telguard. It's designated by the performance of those carriers in that location where you're powering it up. Automatic failover happens whenever something is wrong. It'll go ahead and switch to the next carrier and continue to operate. So that's the beauty of it. Now, we're not touching that unit until there's something that tells us that we should touch it and we should switch over. Now, one of the questions that we get quite a bit is why T-Mobile? T-Mobile hasn't really been part of the industry in such a long time. Well, T-Mobile was actually, Sprint was, one of the ones that, some of our peers started with. So they were part of it and they kind of went away. The number one thing is that 3 is better than 2. And the third option really just rounds out the most amount of coverage you can possibly get in the US. There are areas in Hawaii and in Puerto Rico, I know that's an area that David covers, that he's very happy about, where T-Mobile just is 100%, there's no competition, right? So it expands our coverage, number one. Number two, we're seeing a lot of the acquisitions that are happening from T-Mobile. Of course, everybody knows the acquisition of Metro PCS. Everybody knows the acquisition of Sprint, right? Not too long ago, a couple of years ago. Um, all of that really just kind of is a consequence of T-Mobile's strategy of becoming that third big player in the industry. One of the things that we really liked about Sprint, about T-Mobile acquiring Sprint, is the fact that when they acquired Sprint, they basically expanded their frequency band coverage. So without getting into the technical details of it, T-Mobile, because of the Sprint merger, because of the Sprint acquisition, is very well positioned to have a very strong 5G coverage moving forward whenever the LTE sunset comes around. I think they're already touting to have the best 5G coverage out of all three players. That could very well be true. But based on what I understand from T-Mobile and from the acquisition, the big deal about Sprint was getting those frequencies, and that's what's allowing them to have that massive coverage on 5G. So if we're thinking for the future, installing a unit today that's working on LTE because it's an LTM device, it'll actually switch over to 5G. What that means is that when the switch happens, when the sunset happens, it's just going to continue to have, incredible coverage. And again, not just because of the multi-carrier, but because T-Mobile is also pushing more and putting more investments into their 5G network. So the first multi-carrier device, the TG-7FM. So we wanted to come into the multi-carrier world with a very light device, and by that I mean a very economical device, a device that will give you the very basic thing that we see the fire world really wants to do, which is soul path installation. So this guy powers from the panel, takes 12, 24 volts. It actually takes up a lot more than that, but for UL purposes, we had to call it a 24. It can go all the way up to 30. Not a big deal. It has the UL listing for both fire and intrusion, so it's not limited. So you can do combination Firebergs. If you have like a 128 FB working with both, this guy will do it no problem. So our approach to the first carrier for the first unit was to come in with a unit that will serve a single purpose. Let's gauge how it goes. Let's gauge how the market takes it. And based on the initial feedback, man, we're ready for the second product. It's already underway. So with that, David, I don't know if you have anything else to add, or if you want to go ahead and take on some of these questions.
Nope, I think you pretty much covered a lot of that. We'll kind of just leave it open to questions now if anybody does have any.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. We have a few minutes left here. So the first question I see is, will Telguard work with CCTV systems?
So currently it doesn't, in that we don't provide that internet or that cellular access to CCTV systems. Our interfacing is strictly with panels. And in some of the partnerships that we have going on, we do more than just alarm services. But I mean, as a company, we're more than open to any kind of partnership that will use our technology to take the industry, right, or any segment of the industry to the next level. So more than open.
Awesome. When will the TG-7FM be available, and is it through all distributors?
David, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're expecting right now for maybe Q1 of 2025. Could be sooner. We're just waiting on that stamp of approval from UL to kind of start shipping these products out, but it's right around the corner. And was that a two-part question?
Yes, it was. The second part was, is it through all distributors, or will it be
Yes.
through all distributors?
So it will be available through all distribution partners.
Awesome. Okay, just a couple more questions here. Are there any more products in the pipeline that will have the multi-carrier feature?
I was going to mention, yeah, so I'll let Daniel kind of talk about it a little bit, but the TG-7FM, which will have the IP port on there as well. So you have 3 carriers plus IP. Daniel, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so I think for us, the multi-carrier technology will be at the core of the new releases moving forward, meaning that it will either be the base option or an option for any of our newer devices. So yeah, we're just very excited about the technology, what it brings to the table, and really the headaches that it will hopefully eliminate for our integrators.
Wonderful. One other question. There are several other multipath radios in the market today. What are the top 3 things you would say separates your solution from them?
I would say the number one thing from a technology perspective is kind of the emphasis that I gave to T-Mobile, right? And again, if you're in the business, if you're one of our peers, if you've been in a cellular communications world for a while, T-Mobile has always kind of been knocking on the door. But to be fair, AT&T has always been a little bit better at working with partners at providing their service, which is why AT&T was really heavy on earlier on. Verizon has always had a pretty good coverage in rural areas. So it was sort of a natural transition to add Verizon. It wasn't until maybe a couple of years ago when we started seeing T-Mobile coming into the picture and making strong moves where we decided, hey, that's a total difference maker. And one of the things that we actually did, we actually ran, like David mentioned, we're currently going through UL on the TG-7FM product. So we are, don't quote me, but we are hoping to get it done by December. I don't want to get into next year. It needs to come out this year. We're doing everything we can to get it out into the shelves by December at the latest. But what we did early on was we actually sent out units to, we gave what we call alpha units to our sales team. And David, I think you took it to a couple of different locations, Texas included, and we were able to see the performance. And again, I don't want to talk too much about one carrier versus the other, because to us, all three make up the whole picture, right? 3 pieces of a puzzle. But it was surprising to see how T-Mobile outperformed in some of the areas where I would normally consider to be a heavy Verizon product or a heavy leaning towards AT&T type of area. So I thought it was very surprising to see that happen. So I think that's one of the big differentiators for us. Then again, also the experience that we have with the carriers, the direct connectivity that we have, the connections that we have with them. This is what we do, right? We've been doing cellular since the late 80s. I don't know that there's any more experience or tenure staff in the industry when it comes to specifically focusing on cellular technology. So I think there's a lot to say about that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we answered that one. I believe we have one question left. Do you have any products for Berg that will have multi-carrier?
So right now, I guess the Berg listing is going to be available for the Fire products. So if there's a need for that to happen right now, right, a TG-7FM or the future product that David mentioned, the FEM, will have the Berg listing attached to them, so it can absolutely be used for that purpose. But for right now, those are the 2 products that are immediately coming to mind. As we continue to see the demand for it, of course, the market dictates what we push out. So we can expect more and more products coming out in 2025.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We are running out of time here. So I guess one kind of a question, if somebody wants to get in touch with somebody from your team, what would be the best way to do that? Do you have a link on your page or something like that?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, telguard.com, there should be a contact us link there. You have the sales team, the full sales team. You just click on your state, and it'll show you who your direct sales contact would be here at Telguard. And you should have an email and phone number to contact us. And if you need to get in touch with anybody else, I mean, we'd be that first point of contact to kind of delegate who else would get involved. But yeah, it's pretty simple. Just go to our website.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So for those of you that have or that want to have any discussions with the Telguard team, those would be your instructions for that. And I believe, yep, that is all of our questions. And we are ending right on time. So thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much, David.
Awesome.
Do you have any further closing remarks before we close at our time?
No, just go ahead, Daniel.
No, you go ahead. No.
I was just going to say thank you for taking some time today and joining us.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.